Okay, so our big pregnancy cohorts were designed to identify some factors that we could use in screening tools to predict which women are at risk of developing a major pregnancy complication. That's important because when women are in their first pregnancy, we have no idea what risk they have for conditions such as preeclampsia and preterm birth. In Adelaide, we have actually been successful in identifying a suite of factors that predict risk in early pregnancy for subsequent late pregnancy complications. And we in fact have 4 screening tools that could be used, 1 for preeclampsia, 1 for spontaneous preterm birth, 1 for gestational diabetes and 1 for intrauterine growth restriction. And we're very excited to say that we've actually been able to validate these in a new recent cohort, and so we're hoping to advance these and get them on the market. Okay, so we know that babies who are either too small at birth or too large at birth are at risk for developing chronic disease later in their lives. There is information to suggest that actually it's not so much about how you grow, but the factors that result in you actually not growing enough or growing too much. These tend to be nutritional, metabolic, and potentially others that we don't know yet about. And the effects of things such as poor quality diet are probably mediated via epigenetic changes that occur in the mother herself, but importantly in the placenta and in the fetus as it gestates. And these may be even heritable, such that some of these propensities for lifelong chronic disease might be passed across generations. Okay. So there's been a lot of interest in vitamin D and its role in healthy pregnancy. And the evidence though is quite different for different populations, such that in some populations maternal vitamin D deficiency is associated with conditions such as preeclampsia and particularly gestational diabetes, whereas in others some of these relationships don't hold. Potentially that with gestational diabetes actually will, because it seems to be more common across different populations. Now, how does it work? Well, vitamin D actually, although we say it's a vitamin, it's actually a steroid. So it's like a steroid hormone, and it has a nuclear receptor called the vitamin D receptor, which actually is a transcription factor that turns on maybe up to 3,000 genes. And so it's very hard to pinpoint exact mechanisms how vitamin D deficiency might affect pregnancy complications. However, we do know from animal studies that vitamin D deficiency in the mother substantially alter the mother's immune cells in her what we call decidua, which is the pregnant lining of the uterus, and that causes inflammation in the decidua, which has negative impacts on how the placenta develops, and hence that will affect the fetus. We also know that vitamin D, of course, is important for calcium uptake, and it might be that in some populations the reason why we're not seeing effects of vitamin D is because these populations are calcium replete. So a major function of vitamin D in pregnancy is to increase uptake of calcium from the gut. If you've got plenty of calcium, probably that doesn't matter so much. But if you're deficient in calcium, then that can become a limiting factor, and this might explain some of the population differences that we see. Certainly our animal work is also showing that potentially the relationship with vitamin D is more about calcium than vitamin D itself. So we've had mouse studies where we see preterm birth in mice that we fed diets deficient in vitamin D and deficient in calcium. If those two occur together, we see preterm birth, whereas separately we don't see these effects. So who inspires me outside the health system? That's a hard question, but I think that probably Bill and Melinda Gates and their foundation. they have spent so much money trying to help people, particularly in low-income countries where, of course, health resources, access to good health care are scant, where some of the biggest diseases that we encounter occur in abundance. And I think the sort of work that they're doing to really help people in developing countries in their reproductive health, but also in their fight against diseases such as malaria, I think are just fabulous.